Hello and welcome to another edition of 310 to Left. It's brought to you by your New England Ford dealers and F-Series, America's best-selling truck for 48 years and the official truck of the Boston Red Sox. Tom, Caron, and Alex Speier with you here in the climate-controlled studios at Fenway Park because it was a beautiful opening day.
It was we got one of those, and now we get to enjoy the variability of New England weather in spring.
I talked to Garrett Crochet. I said, "You enjoyed that weather?" I said, "Yeah, you'll see it again in June."
Yeah,
maybe July.
He was in Chicago, so he's seen worse. He's all right.
I know, but it was such a tease.
Yeah.
Like if you were new to this,
false start.
You're rolling into I had no idea Boston was so beautiful this early in the year.
Yeah, it only happens when he gets introduced for another extension, I guess.
That's right. Only when you extend people. I don't know. Kristian Campbell had his press conference on a gloomy, rainy day. Only pitchers, only filthy lefty pitchers that Lou Merlone calls pigs.
I don't know. We still need to sort through whether or not pig is the final answer. Again,
it's
Chupacabra.
Not a nickname. Yeah. Pig isn't the nickname.
Yeah.
Pig is the classification.
Right.
Now we have to
mythologize.
Yeah, or like I said, big swine. Why not just Big Swine? It's kind of a gross nickname.
Yeah, I wonder, like, that can go one of two. Do you want to have something that seems so very base?
Right.
Does that really encompass it? Or do you view yourself as being I don't know, as having superpowers? Superpowers
are good. He has superpowers.
It seems like it.
He's got a 99-mile-an-hour little superpower that he throws every once in a while.
Even if Ramon Laureano says that he's not throwing as hard this year as he did last year, which
give him time.
Yeah,
give him time. He'll loosen up
after April. Yes, I think that's fair.
It had a little bit of everything. We kind of had the full Fenway experience opening weekend, didn't we? We had the glorious sunshine and just a wonderful pregame ceremony with the 1975. Sarah McKenna did another amazing job. Somebody from ESPN was saying nobody does this better than the Red Sox. I mean, the ceremonies are special. They make you cry. They make you smile. We did all of that. You had a great game. You had 5 runs in the first inning. They hadn't done that since April of 2023, scoring 5 runs in the first inning of any game. And they did it on opening day. Place was electric. Then in the 9th inning, we saw the defense fall apart once again, and you had to go to Chapman. That game itself was kind of an entire season in a day. And then you woke up the next day, and it was raining, and it was cold, and it was miserable, and we thought there was a window. There's always a window. There was no window. The window was slammed shut.
Opaque, at least, right? There was a lot going on over the course of just a couple of days at Fenway. But I do think that you're right that something culturally was happening there on Friday, right? Like something that, the energy in and around the park was exceptional, but starting with the ceremony, right? And feeling like and identifying the connectedness of the ceremony in that group that was being celebrated to what's happening now in a way that's a little bit different. Like, the last couple of years it was like, the 2004 team showing up at the home opener in 2024 is a reminder of what's not present, right? Like, which was fair. Right. That was a fair critique. And, as much as people were excited about celebrating what had been, there was also a sense of separation between past and present, whereas I feel like the bridges have been reformed to the point where you're talking to Dwight Evans and Fred Lynn afterwards, and they're saying, we can relate to the group that we're seeing on the field, particularly because they see this kind of this growing number of talented veterans. They haven't arrived at having as many talented veterans as the 1975 group, which had like 16,000 Hall of Famers on it. But nonetheless, it's the number of veterans combined with that infusion of youth that's coming, starting with Campbell, with Mayer and Anthony knocking loudly in AAA behind it. They're you look at the past as, as prelude in some ways, in a way that hasn't been the case in the last couple of years.
It's a great point because it does mirror, right? Dwight Evans was here and Carlton Fisk was here in 73 and 74 while Jim Rice was winning a Triple Crown in Pawtucket, right? Yeah. And then those guys came. You think that Mayer and Anthony, who already, were bashing balls in their early days in Worcester, that they are right on the heels of all of this. It feels like something is coming together. And I think that's the biggest difference. Even, I was going back to 2013 with Will Middlebrooks.
Sure.
And that team felt like it had a chance to do something special, but it was definitely a small window of opportunity. You knew that. You knew Johnny Gomes and Shane Victorino and Mike Napoli weren't here for the long run. They were here to try to get something happen, and they did. 2018, they went all in. They traded away a lot of prospects, and you knew those guys weren't locked up, and we'll dig into that a little bit. But you kind of knew that window was closing. This feels like this could be a fun season with competitive baseball and a return to the playoffs, but it also feels like the beginning of something enduring, and we haven't felt that in a while.
Yeah, well, and I think that sense was amplified, too, both by virtue of the talent that you see on the opening day roster, as well as the fact that it's combined with a number of these long-term deals that suggest that exactly that. This isn't just a moment in time where you're hoping that things come together and crystallize. And, you mentioned 2013, but I don't think there was a whole lot of sense that it was the beginning, right?
But we kept saying, all Johnny Gomes does is win. I said that all spring training. I didn't know he was going to win that year.
Not sure, yes, and the next one for that matter. But we should, So I think that there's something that is that's different that's happening when you're identifying the beginning of an era, a group that is going to be the Red Sox are going to be building around for several years to come. So I think that the whole climate around the team has changed, not just because of the infusion of talent, but because it's the infusion of talent combined with long-term commitments that give you a vision of like, hey, you have a pretty good sense of what the Red Sox are going to look like in 2030. And when we do talk about 2013, it's worth remembering. You mentioned the Gomes and the Napoli and those guys who came on. The holdovers of Pedroia and Lester and Ortiz and Clay Buchholz, who had all signed long-term deals, and so they were there because of that, right? They would have been gone at that point, but for the fact that they had been locked up early in their careers, that also created a huge foundation that allowed them to kind of reform the supporting cast around them in a way that led to a championship.
What you didn't do there was lock up the young guys coming up, right? So you had them for your 6 years of control, give or take. You won again in 2018, but soon they were all gone to the wind. Soon Betts and Bogarts were heading to the West Coast, again, that was your window.
Or when they did lock them up, like they
locked up Bogarts. Yeah.
Xander had that deal, right?
That's right.
Like 1 year out from free agency. It was a more expensive deal, and it was one that added a few years in Boston rather than 5 more years in Boston. Devers, they ended up locking up 1 year out from free agency, so it ended up being a very very expensive long-term deal, and one that gives you a guy to build around, but doesn't have the same. It creates different choices.
But that didn't feel like a deal that was about building around.
Exactly.
That felt like it was damage control.
Right.
We got to lock up somebody.
Right.
We're getting crushed for losing everybody. We've got to get one guy under control, and you're definitely building around him.
Right.
Like he's the
you
aircraft
have a cornerstone.
Carrier. Right. There's no doubt about that. But when it was done, it didn't feel like, all right, here we go.
Right.
Now we can see the future. You were like, all right, so it's step one. I have no idea when step two is going to happen.
Yeah, right. Whereas with Campbell being locked up for the long term, there are so many things that permits. Both because he's a really talented, he looks like he has a chance to be a pretty special player for a number of years through the life of that contract, but also because you hate the phrase, right? Like everyone's tired of hearing the phrase payroll flexibility, but the reality is that when you have a lot of young talented players who aren't getting those mega deals, then it gives you an opportunity to go out into free agency and supplement the rest of your roster by finding those guys. And again, getting back to that 2013 group, the reason why you're able to have so many free agents, talented free agents that you're bringing in around it is in part because you had younger guys who were locked up for long-term deals that permitted you the vaunted payroll flexibility.
The problem with that ultimate group is you won it again in 2018, maybe the best team in the history of the Red Sox. But there was a finality to that. 2004 felt a little bit like that, right? Pedro was leaving, Johnny was leaving, things were going. Hustain was going, and
over it.
They had the young players to come together in 2007 and kind of get that started. We're at a point now where it feels like the young players are here. And, you had Rafaela locked up last year. You get Campbell locked up this year. You've got Crochet now under contract. You got Bayo last year. Like, you've made moves on both sides, pitching and positional players. We were doing stuff a couple years ago at the end of the season where it's like, who's locked up? And it was a short list.
Right.
Now we did one the other day, and it's like, all right, there's 6, 7, 8 guys. And that's not talking about guys you have control of to begin with. Right. The Tristan Casas, he's not locked up, but you've got him for a good long time.
Jaron Duran, right?
Jaron Duran.
You have a few more seasons of Jaron Duran under control. Wilyer Abreu, a lot of seasons of control of Wilyer Abreu, who looks like he is taking another step forward that's been very interesting and should raise some of those same questions about whether or not he might be a candidate for a long-term deal. But you're absolutely right. I think that, I talked briefly about that with Jason Varitek the other day, because Varitek was part of a first wave of extensions for the Red Sox. We're talking about more than 25 years ago at this point, but Nomar, Varitek, Derek Lowe all signed long-term deals with the Red Sox at relatively early stages of their career and created a kind of, a group that knew collectively what they were pushing towards, right? Whereas instead of having those questions where you're looking around and you're wondering what your future is, when you have those contracts, it tends to kind of focus you on task at hand in interesting ways, and you are able to build kind of deeper cultural roots because you have guys who know that they're not just passing through and who know that they have an important place in the organization for years to come.
The interesting thing to me is when we showed that list, I'm looking up at the monitor, nobody knows what I can do. We showed that list that you can't see. It also included Trevor Story and Masataka Yoshida. Now, no one is thinking of them as part of the young core that this will build around, right? If anything, you're thinking about how they are blocking Marcelo Mayer and Roman Anthony. Now, Trevor Story's gotten off to a nice start. Yeah. He's reminding you of Fenway Park, that swing plays. Yeah. There's no doubt about that.
So does the athleticism.
So does the athleticism. That left side of that defense.
A very impressive reminder.
Is fantastic. But there are still some ill-fitting parts to all of this that they're going to have to figure out in the next 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example. So, 2011, they signed Adrian Gonzalez they announced the extension for Adrian Gonzalez towards the beginning of that season, and I'm looking around at the Red Sox roster and thinking like, holy cow, everyone seems to be in place for several years to come. This is a very settled roster. Not so much. About in the middle of 2012, they blew up the whole thing and repurposed a lot of it. Again, kept some of the building blocks, but reconfigured a lot. So yes, there are going to be some interesting pivot points moving forward where they're going to have to make some decisions about how exactly the parts fit, and that's a good problem for the front office in most ways, right? Like when you have talented veterans as well as incredibly promising prospects on the horizon, that gives you an array of choices. We saw some of those choices being exercised in the trade for Garrett Crochet, but we're going to see more in the years to come. When it does come to those, what do you do with Masataka Yoshida? What do you do with Trevor Story as Mayer and Roman Anthony? Keep moving up the food chain, and for that matter, Franklin Arias, who you're a couple of years out, but they're just filed the name, going to be in some interesting conversations about him in 2026, 2027.
You talked to Mayer around that media day and opening day in Worcester, and it was interesting to hear how cocksure he was, and good for him. But he's like, I'm ready. Yeah. I thought I showed everybody I'm ready and thought I'd make the team. What'd you make of that?
I think that you kind of love it. You don't want someone who is going to apologize for playing really, really well. Sometimes, Roman Anthony, by contrast, had the, I understand why I'm here. I'm ready whenever they call me up, but I understand that I can use this time productively. Whereas Marcelo is a very laid-back person who sometimes is very happy, really recognizes the possibility created by carrying a chip. He did it at the start of the 2024 season when people around Portland were like, Marcelo is kind of carrying himself in a different way, and universally everyone was like, and we love it. Like he was dead set on proving every day on the field that he was the best player on the field, and that he did not, and that anyone who was questioning his prospect status was misguided in doing so. And so I think that we're seeing someone who looked in many spring training games, and there are limits to how much you should take from spring training games. But most of those spring training games, he looked like the best player on the field, and he's not apologizing for that fact.
He was one of the best players in Grapefruit League play throughout the entire spring.
It was
not just for the Red Sox, in the Grapefruit League.
I think of it as being the best prospect camp I've ever seen, better than the Jackie Bradley Jr. 2013 camp, because everything was it was rockets all over the place, in addition to just looking comfortable everywhere he was on the field. Jackie Bradley Jr. had an extraordinary spring training in 2013 that earned him a spot on the roster, but that was also aided by the fact that there were injuries that opened up spots, whereas Mayer didn't have the injuries that permitted that. But, man, he was really, really good, and I think that the Red Sox would have no problem bringing him up in case of need in the middle infield spots.
All right, we're going to hear from Garrett Crochet in a couple of minutes. We'll talk about all of this. First, let's hear a little bit bit from Sam Kennedy. Always interesting to have him on because, he's a president of a team. Presidents of teams are salesmen by nature, right? They have to be promoting the product, and the product is the Boston Red Sox. But he's a legitimate fan, even though people question how much he cares about baseball when you go through a rebuilding process like you just did. But, he did say over the last couple of years, over and over again in interviews we would do, that there will come a time when we're back in investing.
Right.
We're building up the farm system. That's step one. And Chaim Bloom did a great job of that. Now it's going to take some bold moves, and Craig Breslow has made bold moves like the Crochet, like the Campbell, though that wasn't that bold. You got a pretty good deal on Kristian Campbell. But here's what Sam Kennedy had to say when he dropped by on opening day about this team being back in and the excitement building around the product once again. How excited are you by what you've been able to put together and now start to lock it up for the future?
Look, we're ferociously pursuing winning in this organization. I go back to the early days of 2002 when we started. You have to do it with homegrown talent, first and foremost. That is the backbone of your franchise. Last time we won a World Series in 2018, that was on display. Thanks to the great work by the people in baseball operations, our farm system has been completely rebuilt. We're appreciative of everybody that contributed to that. People that are no longer with us deserve a ton of credit for that. And now we're adding guys like Alex Bregman and Garrett Crochet and Walker Buehler on the hill today. And that's what you need to go out and add those pieces to try and get back to the postseason. John Henry, and Tom Werner, Mike Gordon, these guys, they are so hungry to win in everything they do. And it's painful when you don't win. And hopefully, again, we haven't achieved anything. We're coming off a 500 season. We got off to a slow start. We need to really kick it in gear and start winning some games here in April, set ourselves up for a really fun summer at Fenway.
And now you're locking up those pieces for the future, right? This week alone, Crochet and Campbell. Last year, Bayo, Rafaela were both added. You've already got some guys. It's a different feeling now that you're starting to get a feel for what this team will look like over the next 5 to 10 years.
I think back to 2 years ago when there was a narrative that people didn't want to come to Boston. We couldn't find a general manager who wanted to come to Boston. We got Craig Breslow in here. He went out and decisively extended Alex Cora, and I think our off season really started last summer around the All-Star break when he made the decision we want to build around Alex Cora and extend him. We're so happy for that. And then these internal extensions have been huge with Kristian Campbell. But you go back to Rafaela and Bayo, and hopefully there's more to come. Let's be honest. This is where you want to be. If you're in baseball, you want to be in Boston. You want to be right here in this atmosphere. There's just nothing like it. And from talking to the guys, the 75 team last night, it's a reminder. A lot of these guys went on to other places, but there's just nothing like baseball in this town.
All right. So back to your original point early on about the different environment we felt on opening day.
Yep.
And I was talking to somebody after the game, and they're like, well, of course, it's opening day. And I'm not comparing it to last June. I'm comparing it to other opening days.
Absolutely.
We've done a lot of these between us. There were lines out here out of bathrooms that I hadn't seen before. No, I'm not lying. There's a men's room over there. And this is not necessarily how I gauge fan interest, okay? But there's a men's room right over here.
Tom Caron's,
and I have never seen the line to the men's room going out, down the stairs, and into this other hallway.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just that much crowd, that much energy, that many people, not only here at the beginning, but here and staying engaged through the entire thing. It felt different.
Yeah.
Certainly different than it has on an opening day since before COVID.
Yeah, and where I felt it was at the end of the game, coming back out of the post-game media access. So, we're talking about 45 minutes, an hour after the game. The number of fans who were still lined up on Van Ness in search of autographs from players was massive. I mean, there were the number of people who were hanging out well past the game, the end of the game was startling. And so when we think about, it was such a beautiful day, and so opening day on a beautiful day lends itself to a kind of celebratory atmosphere. But it felt different around the park than it has in a while.
And we always, we talk so much when we're looking at this team at the beginning of the year. I'll always say, you need to get up to a good start because that's how fans get engaged. But even within that game, the back-to-back home runs. When Abreu went deep on the first pitch, after you were just sitting back down from the Story home run, this place went bonkers. It's as loud as I've heard it since the Yankees wildcard game in 21.
Yeah, I mean, there were some games over the course of the last few years that you could pick out. You know, we could.
I'm talking about moments, though. Yeah. I mean, that moment was as loud as I've heard.
Full throttle. Yeah,
in a while.
Full throttle.
Full throttle.
Yeah, time to party in the phraseology of our good buddy Eck, right?
Yeah.
There was just an excitement, like a genuine.
This team really is what we were hoping it is. Like in that moment. Again,
the seal's been pulled off.
Right?
Like
We've been thinking about this. We've been wanting to see it, and now we've got 5 runs on the board in the first inning, and the party was on.
So many things, like so much fair criticism that's been lobbed in the way of the team of, you know, like who are these guys, or, you know, like measured expectations, or when are they pushing in? Like so much of that has been answered over the course of this offseason. Not all of it, right? Like there are still reasons to be, you know, you can still look for weaknesses in the team or what have you. But yes, the energy level and the idea that like this is a team that you're looking at with the expectation of them winning and the expectation of them being really good showed you why they can be really good in those right away by, like, you know, with those back-to-back homers. Yeah, that certainly energizes the place.
Faith rewarded, you might say. Yeah, that's been said before. Kristian Campbell, because we're going to get to Crochet in a minute.
Yep.
But let's talk about the Kristian Campbell deal, because in the end, if he is anything close to what they think he will be, that's a heck of a deal for the Boston Red Sox.
It is. And, you know, it's easy to say, well, he failed to max out on his earnings, because there's a real chance that this altered his career earnings projection by $100 million, more than hundreds of millions of dollars. That's a possibility, right? You saw the same day. That Jackson Merrill signs a deal that's basically twice that with 1 year of service time in the big leagues. Nonetheless, he's set up for, he and his family are set up for generations. He is in a great space where all he has to care about in the middle of this crazy transition to the major league life is the field. But you're right. That is a deal that potentially sets up the Red Sox very, very well, because when you're talking about elite talents, you know, this could go a number of directions, right? Like maybe his career path follows that of an Andrew Benintendi. Andrew Benintendi is, you know, accounts for $15 million a year on the White Sox budget. From a dollars and cents standpoint, Kristian Campbell at, you know, 8 years and $60 million, you're looking at, you know, at less than $8 million a year for what that player is going to count against on the payroll. That permits you a lot of flexibility to not only have what could be a very, very talented player, but to have other very talented players around him.
A player who has kind of stunned everybody with his ability to learn and adapt so quickly, right? We talk about skyrocketing through the minors. But even right now, you talk to people who've been watching him from day one in spring training, the footwork defensively to what it is now. I mean, we're talking in 2 months' time. He is a completely different, more confident, more fluid second baseman. I'm not sure anybody saw that in February when he was first out there at spring training.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's work to be done there, right? Like he's still working on getting the clock wound for the speed of Major League Baseball, and we've seen it a few times already on that transfer from glove to hand when he rushes it a little bit and boop, there's the ball on the ground, right? But nonetheless, you're getting to
footwork.
The footwork is gotten way better. And this is him, right? Like this is a guy who was kind of, you know, who had not had the same development opportunities as a lot of other guys entering pro ball, because he only played 1 year of college ball and he hadn't had, you know, super advanced training at that college program. And so instead they, you know, spends a winter in Fort Myers and all of a sudden comes out and it's using the strength gains, using some of the approach development that he had there. He's the best player in minor league baseball last year. So having that steep learning curve is a huge part of why the Red Sox had no qualms about saying we would love that guy to be an anchor of our team for the next decade.
All right, and let's get to the Crochet contract now, because it's interesting, right? He said a couple of different things at the beginning of camp.
Yeah.
He said, I want to get it done before the end of camp. Then he said, well, maybe I'll just let them see me for a year, and then we'll see what my value is. And then he said, we'll get it done by the end of the camp, or we won't get it done.
Right.
And then he didn't get it done by the end of camp, and then he got it done. But it's interesting,
right?
There
will be time for 100 decisions and revisions.
Call it the contractual tush-push, right? They were at the 1 yard line, and they were able to push it in. And they got it done. And I think it surprised us all, because I think once he made that start in Texas, you were like, all right, hopefully they're close enough that they can just pick it up in the offseason and still get it done. Instead, they get it done now, and that's just, again, from a fan's perspective, you're like, okay, Now it all makes sense. This is
Right.
Pedro, right? You traded for the ace at a young age, and you went and locked him up. Now he's yours to build around. That's huge.
That's a great analogy. Like Pedro, that guy who was Pedro obviously was at a further stage of development. He had come to the big leagues. There are some differences, but finding that guy who you want to be your top of the rotation ace for a number of years, who you have control over for, in the case of Pedro, it was 1 year. With Crochet, it was 2 years, so you did have more time to do it. But yes, having that decisive, affirmative thing on the part of the organization of saying, for all of the questions about whether or not they would pay pitchers, they paid a pitcher. Right. And, they're paying him. They're getting a discount off of market rate, but it's not like a huge discount off of market rate. They value those free agent years at about $32 million a pop. So they're taking a pretty good amount of risk for someone who'd only had 1 year as a starting pitcher. But he's the anchor. Like, he is the guy who you are. Again, we're getting to that question of who you're building around for the rest of the decade. You now have identified a very large swine, big swine.
You want me to let you go with that? You decide.
Okay.
A pig.
Yeah.
Right now it's just because he was filthy in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And that was such a great. What was that, about 48 hours, right? We got news that it was coming down.
Yep.
He took the mound in Baltimore. There was a 3-game losing streak in tow, and he struck out 8, went 8 innings for the first time in his major league career. First time since what, college?
Since his first start of his college career as a freshman.
But that was what you were paying for, right? When
Yeah.
a team is free-falling, when you're in a losing streak, it's been a while since you've had that, okay, we've got him tomorrow. This thing's going to be over, and that's what they've got in Crochet.
I mean, look, they've had some terrific pitching performances, right? Like, Nate Eovaldi in 2021.
Sure. Tanner Houck was an all-star last year.
Last year was throwing a complete game. But like Crochet is the guy who they acquired, where you're like, that guy should be one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. And yeah, he did exactly that. He looked like he has a chance to be he pitched like one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball at that moment where he had a statement. And I asked him after that game, were you trying to make a statement in the wake of that contract? And he was like, no, I wanted to make a statement about myself and the pitcher that I'm going to be this year, and not be the guy who I was in Texas when I was walking guys and nibbling around the strike zone. I wanted to be on attack. Here's the 4-seam, and I'm going to come at you with that. And then mix off of that. And it was a pretty eye-opening performance, even as there's another gear to come for him as he builds up into the season.
But a different outing for sure than Texas. A lot of cutters in Texas.
Yeah.
This time he went 4-seam heavy, and obviously the 8 strikeouts. So I sat down with him. I got to talk to Garrett Crochet after the home opener while we're sitting out in the rain, talking about coming to Boston and staying here for the long term. It's Garrett Crochet on 310 to Left, presented by your New England Ford dealers. All right, Garrett, take us through sort of the process that goes into the decision, right? We've talked to you about what it means, but really you kind of had a little taste of free agency, right? You had options here, you had choices. Ultimately, you decided this is the right place. Why?
It just felt like it made sense. To be honest, it was as black and white as it sounds. It was pretty easy for me and my wife to want to be here in Boston. And when the team was willing to commit to me, obviously we were open to conversations. And ultimately it was the values matched up.
I remember meeting you here for the first time, right, at Winterfest, FanFest. Right. And first impressions mean a lot. And your eyes were kind of wide open that day. You're in the middle of winter, it's freezing outside, and there's people everywhere chanting out your name. What was that like, and what did that early impression mean to you?
It was almost like an extra welcome to the show moment. Especially being here for the home opener yesterday. Very eye-opening, kind of behind the curtain of what this fan base is going to be like over the course of 81 home games this year, and hopefully some playoff games as well. Just very exciting, and you could feel the energy all throughout the game. It wasn't just during the intros or during the first inning when we were putting up a lot of runs. It was all throughout.
You also had, it's one thing to talk about history and tradition. We know that, right? The Red Sox have that. But you had a couple of months now to get to know what's under the hood, right? The training staff, the pitching group, all that's got to fit.
Right.
Sort of take us through that learning process a little bit. Was it, I'll say love at first sight, that's a bit much, but was it a pretty quick fit, or is it something that you kind of learned about as you went along?
It was a fairly quick fit. Yeah, I just felt like, there was – it was a cohesive process, I guess I would say. I felt like – kind of off the rip, we were able to, collaborate and share our ideas and points of view pretty early. And, I just felt like we were very aligned in a lot of our trains of thought. I've done some things, obviously, over the course being with a separate organization that they do over here, and some things that, they like that I do as well. Just in terms of, shoulder cares are different from org to org, but for the most part, they have the same kind of meat and potatoes in there. So, kept some stuff, added some new stuff, but overall it was a very collaborative effort. Getting to know everybody in spring training and kind of just laying the groundwork for my 5-day routine of what's to come throughout the year.
Andrew Bailey is a different pitching coach. Like, if you first met, and I covered him when he was pitching here, right?
Yeah.
So if you didn't know he pitched in the majors, you'd be convinced he was from an analytic background, like the way he approaches things. What's that been like for you? Was it a quick fit there with him? Do you guys kind of look at this the same way?
Yeah. I feel like we have a very similar outlook on what pitching is, and in terms of optimal shapes for my arsenal and exactly what I'm trying to chase. From start to start, and depending on what lineup the other team's fielding. Also, a previous coworker of his, Ethan Katz, my pitching coach last year. They had a great relationship, so I felt like it was. We were able to kind of hit it off immediately. We automatically were able to strike that common ground, so it was pretty easy.
We've gotten to watch you a little bit now, and it's fascinating watching you pitch. Can you be a crafty lefty who throws 99? Like, you kind of approach that as a guy who's going to outthink the hitter, but you can kind of dial it up. That's pretty nice to have both, isn't it?
Yeah. I mentioned that it's what I want to be, but it's also very counterintuitive because then I have my start like I did versus Texas, where I'm 50% cutter, and it's like, what am I doing? Like, I've got my bread and butter being the four seam and cutter. Obviously, they each have their kind of predetermined usage in my mind of how I want to, look back on the outing and say I used my four seam, 53% of the time, 55% of the time, and the cutter 25, and then the rest are just kind of sprinkled in there. Like, as far as, the sinker, the changeup, and the sweeper, I don't really have an idea in my head going into a start that I want to use at this percentage, but I definitely have my pockets where it's like there's 7, 8, 9, I'm definitely going to use the sweeper, or I'm for sure using the changeup. It's the craftiness is it takes a back seat to being a power pitcher for sure, but at the same time it's necessary at this level, especially third time, fourth time through the lineup.
You never come out of the bullpen being able to execute exactly what you think, right?
Right.
You got to go through the flow of what happens. But are you a guy who kind of changes a lot over the course of the game? Like after the first inning, are you rethinking everything, or are you a guy who pretty much tries to stick to the game plan until you don't think you can?
You stick to it as best as you can until it hits the fan. With Baltimore, it was, pretty four-seam heavy first and second time through, and then, third time through it was, was able to get the fastball up and into Rutschman, but he kind of clipped it a little. He didn't hit it too hard, but at the same time, the fly to the ball, it kind of showed me what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the head out. O'Neill's next at bat, the very next batter, kind of, signaled that as well. So for the rest of that, the seventh and eighth inning, I felt like I got a little bit more cutter heavy, but that's just, seeing what the other team's going to give you that day, and just taking what you can get in general.
You talked about the eighth inning, what it meant to you to be able to come back out, especially considering the short leash you were under on the second half of the season last year. How nice was it when that night was done to say, I just threw 8 innings in my second start for this team, and let's go from here? Like, how great did that feel?
Yeah, it was a good feeling. Myself included, our first turn through the rotation, I don't think, Fitz is the only one that turned in a quality start, so we knew that the bullpen was hurting and that it was by our own hand, kind of like we fell on our own sword there. So it was nice to feel like, you're able to give some guys a breather. Obviously we've got some long guys back there, like Witt, Weiser can go long, Bernie can go long, Criswell can go long, but you kind of just hate to put them in that position. You want to just turn in the best start you can and save as much guys as you can.
As we sit here, Sox have turned more double plays than any other team in baseball. How confident are you in that defense? How good does it feel to have those guys behind you?
Really? What are the numbers behind that?
I think coming into this, we're 13 double plays, which is 3 more than any other team in baseball. And I'll tell you, defense was a concern here the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So you've seen it. Kristian Campbell, just watching him from day one of spring training to already who he is now. The footwork is so confident.
Took some huge strides definitely at that position. I don't know what he was playing, previously or in college. But as far as I knew, it was he's kind of trying out some different things. I remember him trying out outfield. So seeing the progression that he's had at second base is pretty special. I'm sure having a healthy Story helps out a lot. His defense has been coveted for years now.
And Bregman's pretty good.
Yeah, he's pretty solid as well. And the other day in Baltimore, Willier doubled a guy up, which was pretty sick.
Right.
I feel like you don't see that too often, but when you look across the outfield, Rafa's got a good arm. Duran's got a good arm, and Willier obviously Gold Glover last year. You feel like the defense is pretty shored up all around.
Is that? I know you never take that for granted, but what does that mean to the pitcher? Like knowing the guys at almost every position, at every position, there are guys who are going to make plays behind you.
Yeah, it's important for sure. You don't put as big of a pressure on yourself to strike guys out for sure. You can get into the 8th inning because you're being economic with your pitches, not shying away from contact. But yeah, it's been great to watch.
As the rotation turns, you kind of get to enjoy opening day here. No stress. You don't have to pitch. You come in. What was that like for you? What was it like being able to essentially be a bystander but be in the middle of all of that yesterday?
Yeah, it was cool. I don't know if I said this in the podcast or earlier in the clubhouse, but I told Fitz when we came into the dugout, I was like, I feel like the season just begun. Like it was really special yesterday. Had a great turnout. Like I said, everybody was engaged throughout the entire game. But it was just like feeling the intros. It's unlike any home opener I've been to, so it was really special.
It hasn't been like that in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's been a rough patch, right? Everybody knows a kind of little bit of a rebuilding here over the last few years. But you're coming in as a big part of bringing that back to Fenway. Bregman's a big part of bringing that back. Walker Buehler, Aroldis Chapman, the new guys and the young guys coming up. Is it kind of cool now that you're locked in to know that you're almost on the ground floor of what fans are expecting to be like the next great stretch of Red Sox baseball?
Yeah, man, that's a cool hat to feel like you're putting on, is for sure. Especially I felt like there was a pretty good core group when I got traded over here, and then obviously the additions of Walker and Bregman, and Sandoval, who will be with us, hopefully later this year. I felt like I was joining, a pretty solid established group, and then to, add in those additions, it feels like we have something special for sure.
All right, your wife got the head start settling into Boston. Yeah. You've got a little taste of it now, a couple of days, not much yet. Has she been warning you about driving around here, about the accent? What has her early experience in Boston been like?
We experienced the flow of traffic following the home opener last night, that's for sure. But no, she's really enjoyed it. We feel like, we're able to settle in fairly quickly. I still feel like, it took me 5 years to feel like I was learning the geography of Chicago and how everything was, oriented. So here it's going to take me a couple home stands to really get it down.
The big difference with Boston, why traffic's so tough here? So most cities are laid out in a grid.
Yeah.
East and west. The roads here are literally built on what the Pony Express was in the 1700s. So they were like curling dirt roads that are now paved. So take an Uber.
Yeah, good call.
That's my only advice to you. I'll ask you finally, to be part of opening day is one thing, but you've been feeling it from the fans already. You felt it in spring training. You've had a couple days here to feel it. What does it mean to already know how excited these fans are for you to be part of this? How personally do you take that?
Yeah, hugely. I don't take it lightly, that's for sure. I tried to not show any emotion yesterday, but I felt like during the intros there were a couple hoops and hollers when my name got called, which felt special. It makes you feel pretty wanted right away, which, like we were just talking about, I felt the embrace of Boston pretty quickly after the trade. So to have that yesterday was really special. And
I'll add one last question. How happy are you that you don't have to hit and wear that Wally helmet thing?
No, I wanted to hit. I didn't hit very well in high school. Don't look up my max preps. But no, I was never a good hitter, but I would love just to get a chance.
It's fun, isn't it? I love those organic things that become part of it.
And being a fan, it's like, I don't want to say pitchers get no love, because we do. And it's definitely much harder to hit. So it's like they get the deserved love, whenever they hit homers. But fans value the homer. It would be sick to be able to do that.
Chicks dig the long ball. Yeah. We've been saying it for a long time. And you end up getting called a non-athlete. That's what there's,
fair.
Is it?
Relatively.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Garrett, great to catch up. Welcome to Boston. We appreciate the time.
Thank you, TC.
Thanks, man. So interesting to listen to Garrett Crochet talk about the craft of pitching.
Yeah.
Because he's crafty.
Yeah.
But he throws 100.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting guy, right, who can try to play around with some secondary stuff, but still has that understanding that I need to set it all up with that velocity, which he has. It's not a crafty lefty.
Yeah.
It's a power pitcher who can be crafty.
The phrase that was introduced to me many years ago, and this probably won't be an analogy that anyone loves. Scott Boras at the Daisuke Matsuzaka introductory press conference described Daisuke as being a surgeon with a chainsaw in order to kind of with the idea of someone who has really good command, really good feel for a wide variety of pitches, but also has that ability, has incredible amounts of power. That wasn't necessarily the Daisuke experience. We can leave that. We can set that one aside.
Was that after? Do you know I was on the air live for 7 hours the day he signed? No, do you know that story? We went on the air live. It was the day after the Nesson Christmas party.
Oh my gosh!
Right, and we all knew the next day was the deadline, right? Because it was and so we're at the Christmas party. And I was like, we should go on the air. I think it was around noon where they'd have to be on the plane. Yeah. By the noon to 1 hour. If you remember, right? It was the plane was parked, and so we hatched over holiday drinks at the Nesson Christmas party. This concept
where all good planning happens.
We would re-air our news show, the Sports Desk at the time, I think, and we would re-air that at noon every day, or re-air it all morning up to noon. And I said, well, what we ought to do is I'll go on live at noon, and we'll say they signed him or they didn't.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right. So there you go. So we came on the next day. I went on at noon, and we were waiting for the plane.
Incredible.
And then we found out he got on the plane. And then we
it's
stayed
good to confirm
on the
that
air.
As we learned from Shohei, right?
Yes, it was very different from Toronto's plane experience. But we wound up staying on the air while the plane flew to the East Coast, filling with the things we were pulling out. We got Robert Whiting on the phone, who wrote great Japanese baseball books, and I
gotta have
one of my favorite baseball books. So I had his number somewhere, and we called him, and he came on for 20 minutes. We were just filling with anything we could find. And what
I feel insulted that you guys didn't invite me on. I mean, I realized.
Where were you? You were probably on the West Coast.
No.
Where were you? Were you here?
Back then we were waiting for him to fly here.
Oh, so you were here?
Yeah.
Why didn't we have you on?
I was but a young pup who was.
You weren't with the Globe yet.
I was not.
Yeah, we didn't use that. We were with Globe or nothing. I mean, that's sorry. But so we wound up at one point showing. We were showing the tracking.
Yeah.
It was you can't show the serial number of John Henry's plane live on TV. Can you please take that down? We took that down. So we stayed on the air live to the point where he dropped the puck at the Bruins game that night and handed off to the Bruins pregame show at 7 o'clock.
And then probably collapsed somewhere out of exhaustion. Right.
Before he
Both
ever,
him and you.
Yeah, before he ever threw a pitch, I was like, I never want to talk about Daisuke Matsuzaka again. I am so done.
The first of many long waits involving
many long nights. Yeah, that's exactly right. They're slightly shorter than one of his starts. But yes, so the point being that rare ability to carve up guys, but also they know you've got that velocity in your back pocket. He's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and we talk about Campbell and his ability to learn. Garrett Crochet is at a very early stage of his own learning process, and you get that sense in talking to him because he is so cerebral about the craft of pitching. And even in that outing in Baltimore, where it wasn't like Garrett Crochet upper 90s, it was more of Garrett Crochet mid 90s, which is perfectly impressive. But he was doing things like getting more swings and misses on his changeup than he ever had in a single outing in his career before, which is and adapting his game plan, as we were discussing earlier. I'm going to move away from the cutters and go at guys with four-seamer and with a different kind of mix than I featured in the last outing. And it was he is someone who is going to be interested, who, when you have the best pitchers in the game, it is because they have elite ability, but also an ability to think through the art of pitching. The Max Scherzers and Justin Verlanders and Pedros are pitching geniuses, and so we will see. It's good to know that Garrett Crochet has a very passionate thought process when it comes to pitching.
And he's only 25.
Only 25.
So the thinking part should
with
improve with more experience.
Just over 1 year as a starter.
Right. Incredible. All right. So we had it all over the weekend. We had contract extensions announced. We had glorious baseball weather. We had horrible baseball weather. Can I take this moment to bring up my concept once again that someone is going to create a membrane with drones that can hover over the ballpark and propel the rain away.
How the Rays didn't come up with this once their roof was ripped off is they should have been on this a little bit faster.
Made. The ballpark was ready made.
Yeah, they had already had the material identified.
My Portadome?
The Umbrella Stadium.
The Umbrella Dome.
The Umbrella Dome.
The Umbrella Dome. Your son Gavin is here today. He's a smart young man. There's your mission. You have to create a dome. A dome that is hovered over a ballpark by an army of drones. Okay? You're on that? All right.
All right, STEM. Yeah, we need to, STEM. Believe in STEM education, people.
Why hasn't anybody come up with that, though? Don't you think that could be done? Am I out of my mind?
No, surely you're not out of your mind.
Tell me if I am. I
I
think there'd be a problem with in heavy rain. There'd be a lot of rain pouring onto the streets.
I think wind is the real
wind, and often rain does come with wind.
Yeah, and I don't know the capacity of
Could they be sort of anchored? You could have chains. The drones would bring them up, but the chains would lock them in place.
Hope they don't run out of batteries. That
would be
happen in the ballpark. In the ballpark, if those drones were running out of juice.
That pitcher you just spent all that money on is suddenly hitting the head.
Yeah,
that would be bad. The last thing I was thinking about, not the last thing, but another thing I was thinking about this weekend.
They're deep thoughts with Tom. This is what happens with rain delays.
This is what happens when you have 2-hour rain delay and you don't throw
a lot of random
single
stuff.
Pitch. They need to get to expansion sooner rather than later. We need to get to 16 teams in each league so that you don't have interleague play. If that rainout had been the Tampa Bay Rays, you'd schedule the game in August and everyone would be happy. Instead, now you got a doubleheader which launches 11 games in 10 days at the beginning of the season. Not what the Red Sox need, Alex. You need an even number of teams in each league. You can still play everybody, but you can do it like over a 1 month span in July and have an interleague month and celebrate it. And play the games in weird countries. You can do everything baseball wants to do. Stream it for everybody. Everything baseball wants to do. Just don't have to do it in April.
Well, you're a soccer guy. Wouldn't it be cool to have an in-season tournament going on?
No, we don't need more games.
Yeah,
nobody is calling for more games.
But you could structure something like it's like the NBA.
But those are more games. If you keep winning, you get more games.
Oh, that's true. Okay. Well,
so you're saying the American League and National League would be like the League's Cup?
Yeah. And make World Series. Yeah. I know that people hated the All-Star game being
this time it counts
dictating it, but this one would be a more natural outcome if you had league supremacy having an influence over which league hosted the World Series.
So I'm processing this in real time. I like the idea because I'm a soccer guy. But would you have open dates? You don't know who you're playing until you get through the group stage. How would that work?
I mean, I love that, right? Well, actually, probably not, since I need to make some travel plans ahead of time.
You are tough enough to get on this damn show. Okay, I don't need you unsure where you're going to be in May. We don't need that. But you could do that where there was just 1 week
if
open.
It's consolidated.
You could say you could pre-assign home and road.
Yeah.
So you just have red squares for a week in August.
Yeah.
With no opponent. And I kind of like that.
There's some opportunities there. But I think to your point, I love the fact that teams get to see everyone else in baseball now. I think that's a great development. Part of the reason why my son is here today, right, is because it gives you opportunities to see players who you don't normally, like the Nolan Arenados of the world, right? But at the same time, I do think that it's good to reintroduce baseball as routine,
right?
At the beginning of the season. So it should.
What I loved about the early days of interleague play is it was that 2-week stretch in June.
Yeah.
Right, where everybody was playing interleague play and it was fun.
Event.
You knew. So there'd be more of that, but it could still be 2-week pockets. June, July, August.
Yeah.
Everybody could have a 10 to 14-day stretch of interleague play.
Yeah.
And everybody's hyped. And then once you get back to the business.
Teams, you need to get back to the even number, to the factor of 4.
Which is going to be the 58th thing on the list of concerns when they get this collective bargaining agreement.
I was going to say, probably figure out whether or not there's,
Domes should be number one. Hovering domes for every stadium, that should be number one.
Oh my gosh, I think that my son is going to lose his mind if we don't listen to what his proposal is on the domes.
Okay, 50,000 square feet. Come on up, Gavin. Come here, quick, because we can't. Nobody likes audio that you can't. Come around between us. Gavin Speier, everybody. Checks in the mail.
We'll see if this is edited out.
All right, what do you got?
So, if Fenway's, just say it's 50,000 square feet. A drone is about 1 square foot. So, then you have to have 50,000
No.
drones.
See, I only need like a circle of drones holding up the dome. You see what I'm saying? Like
They don't each hold up an
right.
umbrella, a tiny
So you
umbrella.
need.
They hold up. They
That's
they
where
need
the
to have
math.
the
That's where
strength to
I can't figure
hold
that
the-
out.
So still, that's like a big circle.
Yes.
Very big.
Maybe with a couple in the middle holding up the top.
Well, you remember the
They
parachutes
have to
in.
hold up something very heavy, which weighs a lot. And to weigh a lot, you need a lot of
You would need a lot of drones in order to have the
Yeah.
and a
strength.
ton of battery power.
battery power is one thing. But then you'd also have to have really strong propellers.
That work well in the rain.
So then.
So you're
imagine
saying
how-
it's not a great idea.
Imagine how
There's a
loud
lot of entry
that would
barriers.
be. That would
Oh,
be
the
so
noise.
loud.
The noise.
It would be really loud.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that.
All right.
So now,
Tom's idea needs
So
a little
now,
bit more baking
when you go
here.
back to your table, Gavin, and thank you for that, work out some kind of noise reduction system that would also be in place around the stadium, if you could, please, okay?
Yeah, we're
I would like
relying
that.
on you and your future college years, assuming that we will be able
And
to afford a
see-
college education.
And if you did that, we could hide the noise reduction system into the parts of the ballpark where the other team's fans are sitting. So when Nolan Arenado does something and the Cardinals fans cheer, we don't hear it. See? That's a great idea. Gavin's on
We're
it.
getting to a lot of possibilities, Tom, that are going to be, there's a future episode of 310.
Yes. Yeah, like 100 years from now. All right, we're gonna go. Always fun. Nice to be here in person.
Yeah, a delight. Well, I mean, we get guests
We
when I
get to
show up.
share the square instead of being our own little separate
No
squares.
Brady Bunch setup.
That's 1% of the audience gets that reference, but I'm in it, so
Cool.
I'm here. I'm Alice in the middle. He's Alex Speier. Thanks for checking out this edition of 310 to Left, presented by your New England Ford dealers, the official truck of the Boston Red Sox. We'll see you again next time.